I believe that our players can handle the truth. And I think it starts there. And I really think when we're honest with ourselves, a lot of times we don't tell people the hard truth is because it's easier for us to sugarcoat it.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will help you get better at teaching and leading so that you can develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, I'm really excited to welcome Coach Ben Wilkins to the podcast. Coach Wilkins is the associate head coach for Army men's basketball at West Point. He has nearly 20 years of college basketball coaching experience. He's been at West Point since 2016, where he helped Coach Jimmy Allen amass the most wins in the first 4 years for a head coach since Coach K was there. One personal note about Ben: he's the real deal, and I think you'll hear that come through in this conversation. He loves what he does, and he does it for the right reasons. He also practices what he preaches. After we recorded the podcast, he emailed me and asked me if I would give him feedback on how he did and where he could improve in his communication. I think that just speaks volumes about him as a person. In this two-part conversation, he shares a ton of great stuff that you can apply in your coaching. In part one, we talk about what it's like coaching at West Point, how to be intense but not emotional when delivering tough feedback, telling players the truth, bonding with players, and more. If you enjoyed the episode and want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to get a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode. And I'm excited to share that Coach Wilkins has generously offered up more of his time to present on some more in-depth topics around leadership development and what they do at Army, and to answer some of your questions. The session is called How Army Men's Basketball Develops Leaders, and you can too. It's taking place Thursday, April 7th at 1 p.m. Central Time on Zoom. If you can't attend live, you'll get access to the entire replay. The cost is $10, and after the Zoom, if you're not satisfied with the value you received, we'll refund your money, no questions asked. To register for the Zoom with Coach Wilkins, go click on the link in the show details. And finally, if you're interested in learning more about what we offer coaches and organizations, go to cuttingedgecoach.com or just send me an email at luke@cuttingedgecoach.com. Now to part one of my conversation with Coach Ben Wilkins. Enjoyed the episode. Coach, I would love if we just started off and you shared with the audience a little bit about what it's like coaching at Army.
Yeah, look, excited to be here. There's nothing like working at West Point. It's the premier leadership academy in the world, one of the most prestigious institutions. It is absolutely amazing. And what really separates West Point is a place of excellence. So when you're here, you can feel it every day. And what it does is it makes you have to push yourself because, I think people talk about peer pressure, and sometimes that's always a negative connotation, Luke, but it's a positive here. And, everybody pushes each other to get better. And it's nice to be part of something that's bigger than yourself. Obviously we're representing our entire country. And for us, we're doing a small part of recruiting young men that are going to join our Army as officers. And they're going to get a chance to lead people right away at 21, 22 years old. And I think that leadership component really separates it. And we get a chance to really see what leadership looks like every day. And I think it starts with our superintendent right now. It's General Williams, who's a 3-star general. And my favorite story of him, Luke, is I think the movies are funny now. When I'm at West Point, I don't have a military background at all, because this hard-nosed, like always on guy is not who they are. Who they being the officers and the leaders in the United States Army. And General Williams, my favorite story is he played football at West Point, and he's going to a football pep rally, and he's got his jersey over his uniform. And at West Point, you have to salute an officer, and he has a football in his hand. So here's a 3-star general, and everybody's saluting him, and then he's saluting him, and he's saying, "Go along," and he's throwing a football at him. And I think that's just such a great leadership lesson, is he could relate to a student, not as a 3-star general, just as a regular person going to a football prep rally. And then we had a situation at West Point where things weren't what they needed to be. And that was a stand down day where everybody was, there was an important issue that was going to be addressed. And that was more like you would see a 3-star general in a movie, but different as I learned an unbelievable lesson there, Luke, when he addressed the core, which is the student body at West Point. It was very deliberate. It was intense, but not emotional. And I think there's a huge difference. Sometimes as coaches, we can let our anger or emotions cloud what we're saying. And he was very repetitive in what he said, and he moved around the room. So not only did General Williams give an unbelievable talk, he taught me how to speak with an emotionally charged subject to a group for an hour. So I saw that just the ability to be agile within that. And the last thing, Luke, I know I'm going a little long, but I could talk about West Point all day, is that, we have a group of officers that work with our team, and they're just so humble, because when you do a lot in life, you don't have to tell people you did it. You walk the walk, and they're very confident, but they're very humble. And, we do a seminar with our team, and we have our 5 seniors. Each will pick a topic, and they work with an officer, and they speak in front of our team. And Josh Richardson, who's an elite human being, was giving his presentation a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about team dynamics. He had a team picture. We had our team picture, and then he had a team picture of a group that he led that went and rescued Jessica Lynch, the first ever POW woman rescued for America. And it was a matter of fact of, hey, this was our team. This was the mission. It wasn't push my chest out. Hey, we did all this. Look at me. It's just, this is what we had to do. This was the mission. This is what we did. So for me, the biggest piece is being surrounded by excellence and seeing what real leaders who have done real life stuff, because they've literally risked their life for our country. So it's a special place, and I pinch myself every day getting the opportunity to work here and being in this environment.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for sharing those stories. It's fun just to, get a little peek behind the curtain. I've always been curious, what is it like coaching in that kind of environment where obviously they're there for school and their military training, and then you've got student athletes on top of it. So I think that's fascinating. And I want to follow up on one of the things you mentioned. You mentioned, I forgot his name already, the general.
General Williams, yes.
General Williams, that had to deliver a tough conversation, it sounds like, to the student body. You talked about General Williams being intense but not emotional when he had to have this honest, hard conversation with the students at West Point. And I'd love if you just shared more about that. What did you learn? And you talked about how maybe it's really relevant for coaches. I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on intense but not emotional with tough feedback, and how coaches can do a better job of that.
Yeah, I really believe more things are caught than taught, Luke. So I think first and foremost, as leaders, we have to model what we say. And as I explained with General Williams, I learned how he functioned in that environment. It was more important than what he said to me was how he led. So I think as coaches, sometimes we can get our emotions can get the best of us. And I think it's very important that we're emotionally intelligent. And within that, we're trying to figure out, what do we want to get out of this situation? If it's an adverse situation, we obviously want to grow and we want to overcome that situation. But sometimes we just scream and yell, and nothing comes out of it other than our players hear us scream and yell. And there's a difference, again, of you can be emotional, but you can't coach emotionally. And some of that is, if you hear people talk about Nick Saban, when he gets mad, it's all intentional. He's prepared himself to get mad. And then the key is you can let it go. So I learned from General Williams is later that day, he actually talked to the athletic department and us coaches, and his tone was so infinitely different than it was about the core, because he knew, okay, now who is this room? What do they need to hear so they can make sure they can impact the core the way they need to? So he was intelligently agile to know, what is the group? What does this situation call in front of me? So and that's, I think that's, as coaches, sometimes we got to take our own advice, and we got to make sure that whatever we're telling our guys or women, depending on obviously what sex you're coaching, that we're taking our own lessons and applying them. And it's hard. We're dealing with human problems. I think the one thing that we can forget a little bit, Luke, sometimes is everything we deal with, we're not coaching basketball. We're coaching people that play basketball. The more that we can understand it's the people, and most of our problems revolve around people, and we're no different because you and I obviously are people. So keeping that compass there. I don't know if there's any follow up or if that clearly answers the question.
Yeah, I love what you shared there and kind of how you tied that together at the end. I'd love to kind of hit on two things. The first is this: you just started to hit on the importance of modeling, and leaders being the leaders. In a previous conversation we had before this conversation, you kind of talked with me about how oftentimes when we as coaches fail to lead well or model what we want from our athletes, it comes from a place of our own insecurities. So will you talk more about that, your thoughts on it, and maybe what your journey with that has been like?
Yeah, it's something that I'm pretty passionate about. And, at some point, the leaders need to be the leaders. The adults need to be adults. And sometimes if I just watch sports on TV and I watch guys getting paid, and it doesn't matter how much you get paid. It doesn't matter if you're coaching a YMCA team or you're Nick Saban. I watched a leader of that team act, lack of a better word, insane on the sidelines. And I always say, what if one of our players or your players acted like that on a court? What would you say? And I really think a lot of it stems from just insecurities. Again, humans, right? We all have self-doubt. We all are unsure. So if Johnny messes up a play, that doesn't mean I'm a bad basketball coach. That means Johnny made a human mistake. And I think the more that we can prepare ourselves and say what mistakes are going to happen, and there's no one that's ever played a game that's been perfect. So sometimes as coaches, we don't understand that, hey, mistakes are part of the game. And but what mistakes I don't think should happen is coaches acting irrationally because a mistake happened. And again, it comes back to Tim Kite talks about all the time, E plus R equals O. The event was the kid messed up. What response are we going to have as a coach to make sure our outcome is that he doesn't make that mistake again? And a lot of times yelling and screaming at that kid just puts fear in him that he doesn't make the mistake. And it's all insecurity. It doesn't mean I'm a bad coach. And I think that's the thing is when you have fear, if I have then anger, I can't have two emotions simultaneously, right, Luke? So a lot of times when I have fear, I go anger just to cure my fear. So it's a little bit of I take a deep breath, and then that fear needs to not be that I'm a bad coach. It's just the kid made a normal mistake. But I think that just stems from that fear, and we all have it. We all have it, and that's we're fighting human nature at every turn, Luke, in the sports world, because it's win or loss feels like life or death. We know it's not, but when you're in the environment, it kind of feels like it, right? It doesn't matter what level you're playing at, but the more you can control your own emotions, and you got to do it outside. Like you can't just go in and think I'm going to flip a switch. You got to do that in all walks of life. And, if someone cuts you off on the road, are you going to beep and horn and lose your mind? Or are you just going to say, man, good thing I didn't get in an accident? Are you going to take a deep breath? So that's what I feel on that topic.
Yeah, I appreciate what you shared there at the end. It's a holistic thing. Like, how are we responding in our entire life? And I love that acronym from Tim Kite too, the E plus R equals O, just powerful for us to consider. And like you said too, we should be considering beforehand what mistakes are going to happen, and knowing that a mistake doesn't mean we're a bad coach, right? And if anything, hopefully we can reframe our mind as, okay, this mistake is an opportunity to teach, right? And to actually be an effective coach, right? I've seen a mistake, great. Now can I help give them a solution or help them find a solution? I think that's got to be our mindset when that happens. And that's effective coaching. And to also tie into what you said about this is human nature. And the piece that's also so difficult when it comes to sport is that your performance and the performance of your team is on display for other people, right? If in a lot of jobs you do your performance and maybe your boss or a few other people are aware of it, but now there's this added pressure of eyeballs watching, right? And being evaluated. And the higher level you go, it's your livelihood and your well-being is how this team performs. And so it's easy, right, for those insecurities to flare up, especially when it's sports are so emotional. They're so pressurized. There's so we value them so much. And so it's really easy to let those things just get us completely out of line with our values and how we want to show up.
I love that, Luke. And you made me think of something as you talked about the mistakes, and it's a great opportunity to do our job. And it's like mistakes are almost job security, right? Like if the kids didn't make mistakes and we told them, hey, you do it one time, you're done, they wouldn't need coaches. They wouldn't need us. They could just do it themselves because they could automatically fix it. So it's job security. And you're right about the eyeballs. And I think the question we got to ask ourselves is, who's more important, the guy in row F, seat 15, or my player? What's more important? Who am I more worried about? Am I worried about how I'm affecting that person or the guy up there that the reality is doesn't know our team, doesn't know dynamics, doesn't know the scouting report? They don't really know,
Yeah, I think that's so important. I had a conversation with Sherry Cole, the former OU coach, and she shared a similar take, just the reality that you got to make sure you know which voices matter, and to realize that there's a lot of voices that want to offer input, but they just don't have context. They don't know you. They don't know those players. They don't know your team. They don't know what you've been through. And so it's important that we don't actually listen to every voice, but that we know which voices are the ones we should listen to, because there are definitely voices that matter, but not all of them do. I want to kind of continue on that topic of mistakes. I love what you shared there. Mistakes are job security. I think that's just a clever way to frame it in our mind. Like, man, I'm glad I'm seeing these mistakes. This is good because, like you said, we're needed if mistakes are happening. I want to talk about, though, just the importance of being honest with athletes, right? So how can we address athletes' mistakes? How can we tell them the truth about where they're at while still keeping a positive relationship with them, and all in this aim of actually helping them improve and get better?
Yeah, it's a great question, Luke. And I believe that our players can handle the truth. And I think it starts there. And I really think when we're honest with ourselves, a lot of times we don't tell people the hard truth is because it's easier for us to sugarcoat it as telling it as it is for them to hearing it. So I think the first and foremost thing is that you have to bond before you battle. And what I mean by that is there should be a previous relationship, right, Luke? So the more time that person knows that you care about them as a person, then it's easier to have truthful, hard conversations because that person knows where you're coming from. So I think it starts there. And for me, it's I'll give you a quick example. We had a kid, Junior Robinson, who I recruited at Mount St. Mary's, really good, really talented player. And some of every situation is a little bit different. We knew he was going to start. He started every game as career point guard, really talented, could really score. He struggled to defend, but he had the ability. So I'm the defensive coordinator, and I recruited Junior, had a relationship with him, knew him, and I made a comment, and we're watching film, and I said, Junior, you're the worst defensive player I've ever coached. And I just made it that matter of fact. And then every day from there, I never brought it up again and said, just so you know, this is where we're starting at. And now some of why I could say that is I knew he was going to start. I knew he was going to play. But for us to win a championship, he had to get better defensively. And then every day we did it together. I like the verbiage of, hey, we got to get you better here. Not you need to do this, because it's a team. We're in this together. So some of that hard truth starts with that. And what's amazing about that story with Junior, Luke, he ended up being player of the year in the league. They went to the NCAA tournament after I had left, and me and him had a conversation about 6 months later. And he brought up the time I told him he was the worst defender I've ever coached. And I actually had forgotten it, Luke. I made the comment, and he's the one that filled in. I was like, well, how did that feel? And he's like, the thing that was great, coach, is you never brought it up again. And we were in this together. And then it was just like every time I told him, I'd be like, I'm okay. Like, that rep stinks. You didn't do this or that. But then I think the next piece is you have to tell him when it's a great rep. And for me, it's just constant feedback. And our players are going to know if it's a good rep, when they're going to know it's a bad rep. But again, come back a little bit to that General Williams. It doesn't have to be, emotional. It can be just matter of fact. And we have a senior right now, was defensive player of the year last year in our league. And for him, it's a look sometimes. I'm just when Josh messes up, like, I give him the look, and he knows, like, he's got to get better. And because me and him have had that relationship over 4 years, and I don't need to scream and yell at him. But players can handle the truth. I think sometimes coaches are scared to tell the truth as much as the players are to handle it. But then there's got to be a follow-up to that piece. And why are you telling someone the truth and where you think? And but everybody wants to be good, right, Luke? And for us to get where we want to reach our potential, we need feedback. And it's important for us to let somebody know, because how many times in your life, sometimes maybe you didn't do something at a high level that maybe you thought you were, but somebody didn't give you feedback. And when they did, have you ever gotten, the question I ask for people out there, have you ever gotten feedback and said, man, I wish they wouldn't have told me that, any of that feedback? Everybody appreciates feedback. So the more we can give it to and the more honest it is, the more the players will grow.
Yeah, I think that is huge. And really it starts with what you shared at the beginning there. You use the phrase, you got to bond before you battle. Having that relationship that can bear the burden, or a relationship that can bear to receive hard feedback. Like you said, you were able just to matter of factly tell them, like, you are bad at defending. You're the worst defender I've ever coached, right? It's important that we have a relationship so that we can be transparent. And like you said there, I really believe that players want to get better, that every player wants to get better. And when you have that relationship where they know, okay, we're in it together. And like you said, sometimes it's one of the shifts we need to make is just being more intentional with our language, using the word we, right? We're going to get you better at this, right? Just showing that you're in that process with them. Yeah, when they know that you're invested in their improvement, they're going to be much more willing to hear that hard feedback. I'd love to know a little bit more, though, about how you or how your guys' basketball program as a whole is intentional about building that bond with your team.
Yeah, I think that bond really stems in a lot of one-on-one conversations, and it's something that we had a guy named Jason Cummings, who's a West Point grad, who worked for the Horizon Group, consultant, brilliant man, and he kind of brought us in and he really talked about, okay, he calls it player counseling. Now, how can you have effective player counseling? And there's three types of meetings he talked about. Hey, one is player A broke a rule. It's black and white. We're not talking about that. Two is a player comes with you right away and he's got an issue and we're diving into that. We're talking about a normal relationship building conversation. This is the third one we're talking about. And I think first and foremost, it's got to be about them, not about you. And what I mean by that is sometimes as coaches, we come in an agenda and we feel like, hey, this player needs to hear all these things because he doesn't really or she doesn't know what they're doing wrong. But what we don't know as coaches is what's going on in their own head, what's going on in their life. So when we have those player counselings with players, how can we figure out what's keeping them up at night? And so it starts with that, for me, I'll say, hey, hey, Luke, let's talk tomorrow. And then I right away I'll follow up, because if someone says, hey, I want to talk, and you're a coach to player, a lot of times players say, oh boy, I'm in trouble. Like, you don't want their mind going there. So right away, John Gordon always talks about lack of communication. Negativity will fill that void. So I want to make sure that I'm not, we're over communicating. I say, hey, we're just going to talk. I just want to see how things are going. Nothing's wrong. Just no agenda. We're going to have a good meeting. And then when I come up there, usually the first question is, hey, how you doing? Now, what's everybody say in America? No one ever pays attention when you ask that question. So they'll say, I'm doing good, coach. Then the key is the second question is, no, how are you really doing? And then you pause. Because what you've just told them is, I actually care how you're doing. And it's amazing when you say that and you just say that same question twice and you look at them like, I care. They're just they will just open up. Well, coach, I'm really struggling with this. And a powerful thing with the conversation is pausing. So what we try to do a lot is we jump in really quick, Luke. And if you pause and you count to three, so when I'm talking to someone, I literally count to three in my head, and I get to about 1.5, what I've done is given that person permission to keep talking, because that pause says, I want to know more without me saying anything. So those pauses will just let those players keep talking. And another trick is, if someone says, hey, I just as an example, hey, I went to bed angry. Oh, you were angry. And you just follow up with whatever their last 2 or 3 words are. Then they will continue. Oh, he wants to know more about why I'm angry. So part of what a good player counseling is, Luke, is I should only be doing about 25% of the talking. 75% of the talking needs to come from somebody else, because I need to know what they're thinking and why they're thinking. And then the other piece is really fight the urge to give advice. We always think I feel like I have all the answers. Sometimes that's a bad approach. Players and people can figure out their own answers to the questions, but you got to ask the right questions. So for me, it's instead of giving advice, ask the right question. So you're struggling with you're struggling with keeping your focus. How do you think you can keep your focus better? What are you thinking? And a lot of times they'll give you the answers. Okay, and then another question I like after we get there, look, what can I do to help you? What can I do? Because we all know you need to get, I don't like the word buy-in, but you need to get buy-in from your players, right? Well, if it's their idea, we all like to buy into our own idea. It wasn't me trying to convince Johnny to do something. It was Johnny's idea. So he's already bought in. Now it's like, hey, what can I do to help you to buy into your own idea? So a lot of that player counseling and that bonding is just listening. And it's amazing how powerful listening to other people are, asking probing questions. And I do feel like when I fight advice, and when I do, I usually use my own life, and I use feel, felt, found. So I feel what you're saying. I felt this way in a vulnerable situation in my life, because I think the more you can be vulnerable, the more that connection will build with a player. And then I found this through this experiences. And here's what I learned, and here's how I grow. So I think it's important as much as anything. It's about them, Luke. It's not about you. And if you can go in there and because a lot of times, players struggling, and they're going to tell me right away, Coach, I'm not playing really well. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. I'm struggling with home. I'm struggling with this. Okay, good. I don't have to just tell you for 15 minutes you're not playing well. You already know you're not playing well. Let's spend the whole time trying to figure out how to get you to play well. So that's the biggest thing with that bonding piece. And the other piece I think is huge, Luke. This is a huge piece I forgot. Don't do it in the office. Do it somewhere unique. Move, walk. I love walking talks, because when if I'm looking at a boss, it's harder to tell the truth. But if I'm walking side by side with somebody, now I'm looking, and it's a psychological thing. Steve Jobs did it, and he's a lot smarter than me, obviously. So I'm going to steal from Steve Jobs. He did a lot of walking meetings because he wanted people to be able to tell him the truth, but he knew if they were looking at him, he'd get that less. So for me, a lot of my one-on-ones, and I do it in different spots, and it's crazy how 7 years ago I can tell you when I talked about a player for a certain situation, because it was unique in my brain, because I don't have a talk on that bench or that seat. So get out of the office, get somewhere different. But those are some tricks that hopefully can help people. The pause is huge too.
So many good things there, really practical things that you can take into a conversation with your players. Two things. One, the walking, smart people have confirmed that that's really powerful. Part of the reason it's so powerful too, like what we know about the brain, is that repetitive movement, like walking, like regulates us emotionally. And so it's a lot easier to have a logical conversation where we're thinking and speaking and using the reasoning parts of our brain when we're walking, because literally it's helping our bodies regulate their emotions. It's avoiding us staying in that the amygdala, right, where our emotions are flared up, and so it's just easier to talk about hard things when we're moving, right? Which I think is really cool. So I props to you for doing that. I am curious though, with those one-on-one meetings, those really relationship building moments, is that something that you guys as a staff are like really intentional about, saying, hey, Coach Wilkins, you have these 5 players that you've got to get a one-on-one with this week? Or is it more of you guys are just taking initiative as you feel like there's a player you need to connect with? How do you do that maybe as a staff? Is that a priority in terms of how it's divided up, or who's meeting with who and when?
Good question. Look, I've been on staffs that have done it different ways. Ours is more organically, where just kind of checking in with guys. And we've kind of gravitated a little bit to who's maybe has a different relationship with certain players, certain guys. We've tag teamed back lack of better term. We had a really good player from Kentucky, Matt Wilson. He had a post coach, and me and him were really close as well. So we had 2 guys that would spend time with Matt. And I think a little bit of it is having a feel. Someone like Junior, who I talked about previously from Mount St. Mary's, he needed a lot more conversations almost daily, where some of our guys here, you might be able to tell. We have a kid, Aaron Duhart, who's hopefully president of the United States one day. I could have a conversation with him every 2 months, and it'll resonate with him maybe the rest of his life. So I think it's a little bit of having feel, Luke. But you don't want it. I think within that too, you don't want it to feel like another thing the guys have to do, right? Oh, it's another check. You don't want to oh, I'm going to go talk to coach and it's going to be a waste of 30 minutes because time is the most valuable asset. So we do it more organically, long-winded answer. But I could see it being a set schedule. But I think you have to have a little bit of self-awareness of our guys, their schedule, how much they need, and what's the best way. I think you should have a best approach for each player, whether it be different coaches, multiple coaches, maybe just the head coach, depending on a certain player.
Yeah, I like that. Just considering their needs. Yeah, consider their needs. Consider which coaches connect well with which players. I think that's really powerful.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode. I'll be back next week with part 2 of this conversation with Coach Wilkins. As always, if you enjoyed the episode and you want the podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or just click the link in the show details. And to sign up for the Coaching Zoom with Coach Wilkins on April 7th, go click the link in the show details. We'll be talking about how Army men's basketball develops leaders, and you can too. I'm going to leave you with 3 powerful quotes that Coach Wilkins shared that really resonated with me. The first, we're dealing with human problems. We're not coaching basketball, we're coaching people that play basketball. Most of our problems revolve around people. The second, mistakes are part of the game, but the one mistake I don't think should happen is coaches acting irrationally because a mistake happened. And number 3, I believe our players can handle the truth. I think when we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we don't tell people the hard truth because it's easier for us to sugarcoat it. If we all kept those 3 golden nuggets on our minds, I think we'll be significantly better coaches and leaders. Don't forget to sign up for the Coaching Zoom with Coach Wilkins, and if you'd like to learn more about how we serve coaches, go to cuttingedgecoach.com or just send me an email. I'll be back next week for part 2 of this conversation. Thanks for listening to the podcast.